themselves. So I just want to tell you a little bit about Spark Keeps who have been here. We are a creative community space, and we do all kinds of fun creative programming like this. We also have drop-in hours, and everything we do kind of centers around helping people discover their creative power. So if you want to learn a little more about us, you can check out this guide, which is on the counter by the chips, and our program guide, which shows everything that's coming up in the next couple months. Like this, we have some other workshops that are small group, kind of intentional activities, and we also have drop-in programs such as Drop In and Write, which is led by Wesley over here. And we also have a drop-in and draw and some kid stuff, and then we have play shops for kids and community events that are larger events that are free to come to for everybody and open to all ages. So that's kind of our deal here. We are volunteer run, and we are funded by donations. So if you'd like to volunteer, you can actually go to our website and fill out the volunteer form, and then we'll send you a reminder for our next volunteer orientation, which is what was going on here when you guys got here, if you're confused about that. Donation envelopes are also in that little rack of stuff. And then we have memberships, which are not required to hang out here, but if you want to check anything out or use computers, you need to fill out one of these and just show us your ID one time, and then you're in forever. It's free, so you can grab one of these and fill them out if you want to do that thing. So all of these things can be found right next to the chips. So yeah, thanks for being here. I'm going to hand it over to you.
Okay.
Well, like she said, my name is Adrienne. I am an author and independent filmmaker, usually the writer in that capacity. Asked these four people to come here today because they're all, huge Star Wars fans, number one, and then also because they're people who have different types of specialties in storytelling. So I will let them introduce themselves.
This was not what we discussed.
We can start on
We're
that.
already going off script. So you want me to start?
We're already off script.
My name is Joseph Delbo. I'm married to her, and I saw Star Wars in the back of an extended cab pickup truck at the drive-thru, the first one. So it's like
Drive-through or drive-in?
Drive-in.
a drive-in, right?
It's an
I
audio
don't
concept.
sleep much, so.
How many times did you drive through the whole movie?
So yeah, I was there from the beginning. I'm a filmmaker and storyteller. I study the arts of storytelling, mostly because I'm a GM and run a lot of games, but I wore out my Star Wars VHS tape years ago, stopped counting at 100 viewings, and that was back in the 80s. So I'm going to talk about the cinematography sort of angle on Star Wars.
I'm Tom Caraway. I teach creative writing and editing at Whitworth. I teach a class in Tolkien, so I teach Lord of the Rings as a text. I teach a lot of fiction writing classes. I teach a novel writing class. And so, like Joe, I saw Star Wars at a drive-in when it first came out.
Not a drive-through?
Not a drive-through, no. And it wasn't an extended cab. I think it was a regular cab. Pickup. It was probably my earliest fully developed, fully remembered memory. So Star Wars has been really central to kind of my identity as both a writer and person who studies narrative throughout my life. So I'm really excited to be here, and I'm going to talk about some of the mythological hero quest aspects, referencing Joseph Campbell's monomythic structure that Lucas follows in some ways very closely, and as I'll discuss, in some ways not very closely.
My name is Kay. I'm trained as a reporter, but I moonlight as a young adult fantasy novelist. I grew up watching Star Wars on VHS, that gold boxed set, late 90s, over and over, and the prequels were coming out just as I was getting into my middle school years, so it was a very formative time for me. And I am, I think, mostly going to be examining Star Wars from a characterization angle.
I'm Kathleen Alexander. I am also an educator and writer. I specialize more in the nonfiction stuff and rhetoric. And I'm going to give us a quick brief overall of narrative theory, breaking it down into just some of the specific parts like scene setting.
Okay. Just so you know, we're going to be focusing mostly on the movies because in a 2-hour time frame to even discuss 8 movies is a pretty tall order. Of course, we know there is much more to this universe than that. But, so we might reference things in passing if they're relevant to a particular topic, but we're not going to delve into the cartoons and the books and the role-playing game and all that. So let's start with what Tom already brought up a little bit, which was that hero's journey.
Okay. So I actually left a sheet for you on your seat that details the stages that Joseph Campbell describes in the basic quest narrative. Even if you're not familiar with the individual components, you are very familiar with the quest narrative. The details and the stages that we'll talk about tonight apply just as much as they do to Star Wars as they do to Lord of the Rings or to The Matrix, let's say, or to Avatar: The Last Airbender or The Lion King, right? There are some theories of storytelling in which there are only 2 kinds of stories, right? Stranger comes to town or hero goes on a journey, right? So really, a lot of the stories that utilize that hero goes on a journey structure rely on all or many of these parts. And I'm going to talk about these first just in episode 4, just to kind of give us an idea of what it is we're talking about. And then back up a little bit or kind of circle back around and not do the whole process again for 4 or for 5 and 6, but for the narrative that those 3 as a whole make up. And then we might have a little discussion in Q&A about is the narrative complete? Is the quest fulfilled? Because I think it's a really interesting question. One thing where a lot of these kinds of stories begins is in the ordinary world. We have a depiction of the hero in their native element, let's say, right? So with Lord of the Rings, of course, in Fellowship we begin with a long prologue concerning hobbits, right? And we see the origin of the Shire, and we see Frodo and his companions in the Shire to establish essentially what is at stake for the hero, right? It is often an idyllic kind of world. Think of Pride Rock with Mufasa and Simba running around and singing songs, and everything's great, and the jackals are over there, and everything is great, right? The hyenas, I guess. What the ordinary world does is make sure that the hero has some place to return, and that's going to be important at the end of my discussion. And one of the major places that Lucas departs from Campbell is in the establishing shots that probably Joe will talk about and others. There is no ordinary world. In fact, in episode 4, we begin in the special world, right? The other special just reminds me of this. The movie that maybe most perfectly follows the hero's quest is the Lego movie, right? And it's even, he is the special, right? So that's the crossing of the threshold for him, and he becomes the special. But Lucas does not start us in an ordinary world. He starts us in the special world. And in fact, the ordinary world doesn't have a lot of relevance, right? The ordinary world for Luke would be Tatooine, right? It is usually the place of origin for the hero. And while it's arguable in an academic sense if Luke is the hero of that series, we can just assume for the sake of argument that he is. There might be other hero quests embedded within the series, just as there are in Lord of the Rings and some of the more epic scale stories in which we find this structure. But Luke doesn't have a lot of tie to his ordinary world, right? He's not aching to get back to Tatooine in the way that Frodo is aching to get back to the Shire, or really Sam is really the one aching to get back to the Shire. And that's a really important distinction, as we'll see. If we're following along, next comes the call to adventure. And the call to adventure in the case of episode 4 is Princess Leia's hologram, played by R2-D2. And here again, Lucas doesn't follow the very typical narrative structure, because there's a partial call to adventure and a partial refusal of the call, right? And that's because that's step 2 and 3 in the quest narrative, right? And at the first partial refusal of the call, this is where we see the first of the Threshold Guardians, right? Threshold Guardians are those who might prevent the hero from crossing over into the special world. Our first Threshold Guardian in episode 4 is actually Uncle Owen, right? Who's like, oh, one more season. What's one more season? And Luke gets up and leaves the table, and Aunt Beru says, well, where are you going? Nowhere, I guess. Right? Luke is like maybe through the first 2 movies the mopiest hero I can think of. Frodo's kind of mopey a little bit, but a little more empowered sometimes than Luke. The call to adventure is really fully initiated when he meets Ben Kenobi, discovers that he's Obi-Wan, gets his father's lightsaber, which is, in archetypal terms, the talisman, which is, we're not going to talk that much about archetypes, but archetypal characters are really important to mythological hero quests. And the talisman, in this case the lightsaber, functions in many of the same ways as, say, Excalibur or as Sting, as a symbol of the hero's developing heroism, essentially, right? And it becomes kind of a beacon and a symbol for who they are as a developing hero, right? But even after receiving the talisman, there is the full refusal of the call, right? Ben says, after seeing the full video, Obi-Wan says, you've got to come with me to Alderaan. We've got to deliver the plans. I can't do this on my own. You've got to learn to become a Jedi. And Luke says, I can't get involved. Even though he really wants to, which is a really interesting character point for him. He really wants to, but at heart, he is refusing the call. This is sort of conflated, and Lucas sort of reverses these, because step 4 is usually meeting with a mentor, and Obi-Wan is, of course, Luke's mentor. In that sort of cyclical way, we might say that we skip step 1 entirely. We have a call to adventure, a refusal of the call, a meeting of the mentor, another call to adventure, another refusal of the call, and then the ordinary world gets blown up, right? Stormtroopers come, kills Aunt and Uncle, and he's like, well, okay, fine. And off they go to Mos Eisley. Mos Eisley represents the first threshold, right, that he's crossing into. And after crossing into that threshold, we go very quickly to part of step 6, which is tests, allies, and enemies. It's interesting to note tests, allies, and enemies might go on for quite some time in any given narrative. But we do very quickly get allies for our hero here in the form, of course, of Han Solo and Chewbacca, or Chewbacca, if you believe Lando Calrissian's bizarre pronunciation in Empire. But the crossing of the threshold really occurs when they blast their way out of Mos Eisley, and at that point there's really no turning back, right? There's no ordinary world left to return to, which again will be significant. And Luke undergoes testing, right, on the Millennium Falcon as they're traveling to Alderaan, where Obi-Wan is teaching them, to use the lightsaber, to use the Force, to sense the little Guga that's shooting at his butt, so he is tested in that way. He also, in this stage, meets enemies, of course, right? We are introduced to Darth Vader. It's really interesting as from a character development perspective, the journey that Vader goes on, right? Like he's kind of our favorite villain because he's sort of redeemed, right? But he's a bad dude, right? He just like randomly kills people all the time in the first two movies. He's just like, you failed me a little bit, right? And you're dead. That's really, we forgive a lot, I guess, over the course of Return of the Jedi. I guess the Ewoks just soften us up and we're like, oh, well, cool, fuzzy things, so that's cute. Well, yeah, exactly. Following Tests and Allies, we have the approach. And in the approach is usually a planning stage, right? They know what the ordeal is. Think of the approach to Mount Doom, right? They know they have to get from here to this awful place, and here is where the ordeal will be, right? And the Death Star is kind of the ordeal. So the run-up to the planning for that stage is the approach. And in that stage, Han Solo, which fulfills another archetypal role, right? Han Solo is kind of a classic shapeshifter in that we don't know if he's good or bad. We know he's not bad, but he's certainly motivated more by greed than he is by heroism, which of course he shapeshifts again at the end of that movie when he kind of saves Luke's bacon, I suppose, in the trenches. And then, of course, we get to the ordeal, which is the assault on the Death Star itself. And then we get to stage 9, once the hero is rescued by the shapeshifter, and he gets his reward, right? And the reward in this case is that super neat like ceremony at the end where they get medals. Don't you ever wonder, like, what do they do with those medals? Like, they don't have a locker. They don't have like a thing. And where did those outfits go? Like, those were the best outfits in the whole movie. I found that coat. Like, I'd be wearing that coat if I was all the time. If you turn the page over, we get to the final stage. I'm sorry, I've been sick all week and I'm hopped up on Dayquil, so it's probably going to be a little more surreal than I would normally prefer. If you turn the page over, you get to the traditional last 3 steps in the hero's journey: the road back, resurrection, and the return with elixir, which is also sometimes the master of 2 worlds. And this is where I think Lucas's narrative starts to get really interesting. While each of the movies can function independently on their own, and we can probably have a 2-hour discussion about which of the movies is our favorite, or which of the movies is better and why, although really, of course, we would all just come around to Empire is the best, for pretty obvious reasons. The reason that A New Hope is not a full quest narrative, and nor is Empire, is because we don't have a road back, we don't have resurrection, and we don't have Return with Elixir or the Master of 2 Worlds. How we doing here? Am I good? A little bit on time? Okay, I can go fast. So what happens over the course of 5 and 6 is that we come to realize, and another way of looking at narrative structure in these movies, and for those of you familiar with screenwriting or drama, you might recognize the simplicity of the 3-act structure, right? The beginning, the middle, and the end. The rising action, the climax, and the falling action. The setup, the complication, and the resolution, or sometimes the determination, right? And in episode 4, we have Tatooine, we have Death Star and Escape, Act 2, and we have Assault on the Death Star, Act 3, right? In Empire, we have Hoth, Act 1, we have, what happens in the middle? Cloud City, right? Yoda. Yeah, we have Dagobah. That's right. Thank you. Dayquil. I just watched it like 3 hours ago. We have Dagobah Act 2, and Bespin is Act 3, and in Jedi we have Tatooine Act 1, something in the middle, and then Endor Act 3. What's Act 2?
In Return of the Jedi?
Yeah.
Yeah, you start off in Tatooine, and from there you're going off to prepare for. It's a lot of preparation.
Yeah, there's a lot of preparation. There's just kind of milling about in the middle.
Well, I think part
Well,
of
well, actually, Endor would probably be Act 2,
Right.
and then the destruction of Death Star would be Act 3. You think?
yeah, I think the climax would be that lightsaber
Yeah.
battle and the actual attack
Yeah.
itself.
Right.
Because the second act's the
Simultaneous.
whole challenge of getting the shield generator. Yada
Yeah,
yada.
yeah. And so that's a really simple way of looking at the narrative structures of those movies. But if we look at them as individual episodes, we will see that actually Episode 4 is Act 1, right? Episode 5, Jedi, or Empire, I'm sorry, is Act 2, and Jedi is Act 3. And working our way back then, we can see in Jedi, if that's Act 3, we should see the road back, resurrection, and return with Elixir or Master of Two Worlds. And my argument would be is that we actually do see most of those things, right? And this is where it gets important, that we never had an establishing shot of the ordinary world. The ordinary world was actually the special world, right? So it is outer space, right? It is a kind of displacement in that none of these characters really have homes. In fact, Lucas goes kind of out of his way to destroy everyone's home, right? So Aunt Beru and Uncle Owen are dead. We know Luke's not going back as a Jedi Master to become, a moisture farmer, right? Like that's probably not the best use of his talents. Alderaan is destroyed, right? So there's really nowhere for them to go. So as far as returns go, there really can't be much of one, right? We do have resurrection in that Luke should have been killed, right? He basically chose to take his chances with the Emperor, trusting that his father would save him. And it doesn't look like it's going very well most of that time, right? He kind of gets tossed around, and then Force lightning happens, and it's at that point that Mace Windu gets tossed out a window, and I've seen some stuff recently, like, is Mace Windu dead? Some interesting stuff going on there. I don't know if it's true, then that is incredibly clever about what happens with Mace Windu. We'll see. No, I don't think so either.
I think it depends on what Samuel L. Jackson decides.
Yeah, right. They don't need him, right? He's all gooped up now. Anyway, but we do get resurrection, right, in the form of a sort of eucatastrophic, to use Tolkien's term, turn to good by Darth Vader, right, who picks up the Emperor and tosses him down the shaft, and my kids can't. You guys have seen the Funny or Die videos of Star Wars, like with Jack Black and Mara. They're very, very funny, but like when Darth Vader picks up the Emperor, he's like, "Ooh, a little nappy time for you," and tosses him down the shaft. That represents the same sort of resurrection that a lot of coming back from the brink of death, right? That heroes typically experience. So then, if this is the final stage of the quest, we should experience at that point either Return with Elixir or Master of Two Worlds. Return with Elixir often looks like Sam at the end of the trilogy, right? Returning to the scouring of the Shire, that last chapter before the massive appendices begin after Return of the King. And what they're able to do when they return with Elixir, which they actually do literally, right, with the Malorn seed and Galadriel's gift to Sam, the soil from Lothlorien. So they're able to grow all the trees that Sharky / Saruman had cut down, and they're able to restore the Shire to its kind of idyllic, bucolic, Edenic state, right? We don't really experience that at the end of Episode 6. There is no return with Elixir. There is a kind of finality, we thought, until Episode 7, to the destruction of the Emperor and the Empire, right? So that level of oppression and kind of awfulness has been eliminated, and that might be counted as a return with Elixir, but I would actually go more towards Luke being complete in his hero quest here, as evidenced by his master of two worlds, right? And for that, what I'm most interested in is that what we know about Jedi, even from just those 3 episodes, is that they are free from worldly attachments, right? So they detach themselves essentially in a sort of Zen Buddhist way, and are therefore able to act for the good of all, right? They're not concerned with, they don't marry, right? They don't, which is where it all went wrong originally, right, for good old Darth. But they don't have these kinds of attachments that might be used against them, right? And we actually see this in Empire. Yoda counseling, should I sacrifice my friends? And Yoda says, well, if you believe in their cause, then yes, right? Sacrifice them. Don't be so attached to them that you forego your important training. But Luke says, no. I mean, I know you've been doing this for 9 centuries and everything, but I'm going to peace out and go save my friends. Despite that, right, he is still able to become a Jedi Master, do all of the things that Yoda instructs him to do, right? Even in Jedi, when he comes back and he says, oh, I'm a Jedi Master now, and Yoda's like, no, you must face Vader. So, okay, he goes and he finally faces Vader. So by the end of that, he really is a Jedi Master, right? But he is also able to act in a kind of fully human, i.e. ordinary world kind of way, in that he maintains these important relationships with his friends, with his family, that really Jedi shouldn't be able to maintain, right? I mean, lucky kind of for him, there's no Jedi left to really say, hey, you're doing it wrong, buddy. So he doesn't really have to deal with those consequences, although we will see again later in episode 7 how that has worked out for him. But in the moment of the end of Return of Jedi, he really is Master of Two Worlds, in that he is a Jedi Master, and he is also kind of fully engaged in the ordinary world through his relationships with Han, Leia, Chewbacca, R2, and the rest, right? So I think that through those 3 episodes, we do see a full 3-act movement that takes him not all the way back to the ordinary world, but does kind of in kind of mytho-narrative terms sanctify him both to the ordinary world and to the special world. So I think we might see a fully completed narrative. Now, episode 7, of course, complicates that, and we might be able to get into that later. But for now, let's just say it's a complete narrative. So that's what I got.
Hey, one thing I was thinking when you were talking about the beginning of the movie, where we don't see, the first thing we see is not the protagonist in his ordinary environment.
Yeah.
From a filmmaking perspective, my first thought was, well, that's because it's a movie. And very often in a movie, you want to have what they call a hook, where you don't see the guy doing something boring on a moisture farm and he's kind of whiny, because that's not very interesting and visual start when it's a visual medium. No, you want to see spaceships and bad guys and conflict and something exciting.
Well, I think there's so much world building that needed to be done, right? I mean, Lucas is doing this, and this has never been done before, right? It's a space opera, which nobody's ever heard of. That's not even a thing in 1977, right? And so we get that it's an establishing shot, but it's establishing a whole universe that doesn't exist, right? And it does have those hook elements, right? We get the faceless evil, right, of the stormtroopers and of Darth Vader, and we get the kind of hopeless resistance of the comically helmeted, rebels on on Leia's ship, right? And we get the kind of silliness of the droids, right? C-3PO kind of like kind of Monty Pythoning across the hallway in the midst of the laser battle. And so I think we needed those, because if we started with like Barben moisture.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, one of the things, when you try to take a book or a story, that uses that hero's journey and turn it into a screenplay. In screenwriting, it's, I hate to say it, sort of formulaic. If you know the structure of a screenplay and you write to the structure, you're going to be more successful than if you just write like you might in a novel. So I think some of those steps you're talking about were sacrificed on the altar of
Yeah,
cinema.
right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But even still, because there is a structure to screenplays, there's a lot of structure. We see a lot of the same things repeated over and over
Right.
throughout the narrative.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who's going next? Do you want me to
Yeah, I would like
take
you
that?
to take that one.
Question, can we, when, like, if we have questions, should we just, like, while people are talking, raise our hands, or do you wanna?
Let's give it,
have times, like,
yeah,
in
let's
between
make sure we've
speakers,
been able to hear from everybody, and then we'll
Yeah,
we'll
yeah.
or- Okay.
go to questions.
If anybody wants, like, a pen to write down the questions?
Yeah, for sure.
Or if you're dying, just like, I got my intestine. So yeah, we're talking about the cycle. Throughout Star Wars, Tom kind of talked about how there's a 3 acts in each of the films, and there's a 3 act through the 3 in the original trilogy. There's a sort of ring composition where, and in episode 7, a lot of people complain, they're like, well, this is just like episode 4. And that was intentional. Irvin Kershner, Lawrence Kasdan.
Yeah.
He worked on a lot of the scripts, not the original, but on 5 and 6. And the story, there's a debate, whose story is it? Is it Darth Vader's story? Is it Luke Skywalker's story? But if you look at it as a Skywalker family, we pick it up in the middle because Lucas was like, I've got this much money, I have one chance to tell a story, this is the one I'm going to focus on. It's the one he could do. But there's a cycle throughout that mirrors everything very well. Luke Skywalker starts out as this innocent farm boy on Tatooine. Anakin starts out as this innocent slave on Tatooine. And these cycles come around, kind of opening and closing this loop throughout the series. So with episode 7, you kind of see that return to that, what is old is new again, like Battlestar Galactica, all has happened before and will happen again, something like that. So we see that a lot in Star Wars. So I'm looking forward to 8 and 9 to see how those will be reflected, or how they will reflect the earlier stories as well. Take a couple notes from what Tom was talking about. He mentioned that talisman, the lightsaber. He gets this lightsaber from Obi-Wan Kenobi that belongs to his father. And as I'm sure all of you know, one of the final steps to becoming a Jedi is making your own lightsaber. So in the beginning, he's really under his father's shadow. Obi-Wan tells him the story, which is true from a certain point of view, that Anakin was this great guy, he was his friend, your father was like the most awesome dude, we fought together in the Clone Wars, and you should really look up to him because he was really cool. And Luke takes it in, he's got this amazing laser sword, and he's just like, whoa, this is awesome. And then he finds out there's this Darth Vader guy who's not a good guy. He's like the ultimate evil in the universe, next to the Empire that we don't, or the Emperor, we don't really have a clear idea early on in the series. We learn more about him later. But as Luke progresses through his training, he starts with his father's sword, and at a certain point he has to progress as a character from being in his father's shadow to create his own lightsaber. So he starts off that third movie, that sort of the resolution of the trilogy, out of his father's shadow, and he's becoming his own person.
Green lightsaber.
The green lightsaber, which I don't think anybody knew at the time why it was green. One of the things I like about Lucas is I do this with my my games that I run as a GM as well. I throw out a lot of information. I may not know why it's out there, and then later I go back and fill in the blanks. Then my players are like, "That was cool. He planned this out the whole time." It's like, totally, yeah, I totally did that on purpose. And I sometimes think Lucas maybe filled in a lot of blanks later. So those were the notes based on what Tom was talking about. So I was going to hit on a little bit of the cinematography aspects of Star Wars, if you want to do that, or do you want to do some more character stuff first?
Let's jump into character, because I think this is a good time to look at that. I think most people would agree that Luke's quest and his character arc are a lot more interesting than Anakin's in 1, 2, and 3. So why can I address that in the character development?
Well, fair warning, I'm a little bit of an Anakin Skywalker stan, and that's going to come out right now. But I have always been of the opinion that in Anakin's arc in the prequels, he is on paper a very sympathetic character, and he should have worked. You know, he was born into slavery, and he was taken from his mother, and which was overall a pretty traumatic experience for him. He went to train with the Jedi, which seems really nice, but probably was a very difficult transition. He never dealt with these emotional traumas and these turmoils. His mother gets murdered. He's being tempted by the dark side. On paper, you think, like, this should be a character that I can sympathize with and see how he gets from his point as a child, a fairly innocent child at the beginning of Episode 1, to all the way to his fall to the dark side at the end of Episode 3. But something in the execution just couldn't get us there. And I fault this mostly to that weird dialogue that we get a lot in the prequels. But it made it very, as a viewer, and maybe not for everybody, but I think for a lot of viewers, it was difficult to empathize and sympathize with Anakin as he's going through this arc, which made it kind of unsatisfying by the time we got to the end. And compared to Luke, who was, and maybe it has something to do with the type of arc that they were going through, because they both experienced a pretty significant character development from their first appearance to their last appearance in their respective trilogies. But of course, character development doesn't necessarily have to be positive, where we have Luke who's going from, tender desert farm boy to mature Jedi master and has this epic journey in between, and so we're sort of going on the inverse with Anakin, and maybe that's part of where the disconnect happens. But personally, I lay it out a lot to how the arc was executed in the prequels, which is what made it unsatisfying and difficult to connect with as a viewer watching Anakin go over this journey.
Yeah, the way I felt about it, it's like Luke, he starts in one place and ends up a very different place. Mm-hmm. To me, it's like we knew going into Episode 1 where Anakin ends up. So there's no mystery there. And it basically just drew a straight line from point A to point B for me. It's like he's an angry kid, he's an angry teenager, and then he's an angry man. There's no mystery there. And we already knew where he was going to end up. I wanted at some point in that journey to wonder how in the world he got there, and I felt like I could see it from the first scenes. I didn't feel like there was any mystery there. If anyone has read the Dune books, I started reading the first prequel to the original, and I was like, wait a minute, how did we get from here to all these different points where we started in the original 6 books? And that forced me to read 6 prequels, which don't get started on that journey because many of them are disappointing. But I had to know how that journey ended up to set the stage for the first book, and I could not figure it out until we got into like books 5 and 6 of the prequels, because they did a very good job of keeping a lot of mystery in there and not revealing everything. And I don't feel like that was done at all with Anakin's character journey. Kathleen, should I jump in
that's
here?
all?
No, go ahead. I mean, we can come back.
Yeah.
That was so fast.
So where are you sitting with everything we've discussed here?
I'm going to start from the beginning.
Okay.
Now, actually, at the very beginning, did anybody let you guys know that narrative is actually code for telling a story? just needed to start that out. I kind of feel like we should just open with that, but that's just me. So narrative is actually, in its most simplest terms, it's telling a story. But in the end, it's actually ever so much more than that, because it's arguably one of our greatest communication and community building devices that we have. So it is such a powerful way of bringing people together and moving on history and moving us into a shared belief and a shared or acting reality that we move and interact with. I don't want to say act that many times, but I don't know if you consider act and interact
Not the same word.
really the same. But anyway, there's this shared reality that we create via a connection between the words a society uses and the experiential knowledge that we gain as we interact and move in the world ourselves. And we're constantly comparing our experience to that of what we see and hear in the stories that everybody else sees and hears and tells and shares. And the movies that we create en masse, the movies and the books and the literature and songs and all of that is a really excellent way to do that very quickly to large amounts of people. And we see that effect in Star Wars like no other. I mean, when they go out in that spaceship on a 5-year tour to boldly go where no one has gone before, I mean, I just catch my breath every time. See, I wanted to see how many people were paying attention. None of y'all are paying attention.
I just thought you lost it.
I was like,
That
wait,
makes me
what?
sad. You guys thought I lost my nerd card? No, I was just checking. So anyway, this group consciousness that we have is a whole set of shared emotions and motives and meanings, and it's a way to explain how things are and how and what should be believed at what time and with what validity. So it's not just individual meanings for symbols, but all those individual meanings and that experience and what we see and what we hear and the things that are repeated over and over, the death march that we all know, whether we've seen the movie or not. Every time that music comes on, if you've never seen the movie, and there are people who have never seen the movie, they all feel a certain way. They all sit up, their breath intakes. How can that happen when they've never seen the movie, right? Because it has permeated through into our culture, and it creates a very special and specific feeling, a special way of being in that moment when that music comes on and is played. And so what happens is all of that converges in this one place to create a bond amongst that in-crowd, amongst everybody who recognizes those symbols, who recognizes them, the words, who hears, I've got a bad feeling about this, who hears, may the force be with you, because that's used over and over and over and over again. And everybody knows what it means, even though it's a phrase that is used in many different situations, meaning slightly different things. It has different connotations. But what happens is we watch these movies, and when they resonate with us, they take things that we already hold in society, beliefs that we already have, things that we already hold to be, somewhat true, or things that we have experienced, and then it resonates with us. And we see these themes move out in processional fashion to larger and larger and larger groups. And that's why you can hear the Death March music. I know what it is. Huh?
Imperial March.
Death March, Imperial March, same thing.
Someone's gonna die.
You're right. Sorry. Imperial March.
What, Imperial Death March? It was called that.
Thanks, Mom. So each narrative has characters and plot lines, and each narrative has characters and plot lines and scenes, and sanctioning agents, which is those who legitimize the tale, the story, what goes on. Things that say, yeah, people that say, yeah, this is how it's always been, this is how it's always gonna be. I legitimize this. I say, yeah, and that gives it validity. So while there are many ways of analysis and many cool people out there, we're kind of a Kenneth Burke, Ernest Borman fan. So I thought I'd just go really quickly over some 5 major elements to look at anytime you do an analysis of a narrative. And that's character, action, setting, saga, master analog, and kidding.
You're kidding.
No,
I'm
I'm
getting into this.
I'm kidding. I'm not done. I waited patiently. So I'm also an overcompensator when I get nervous. I'll just put that out there. So we'll start with setting, which is by far the easiest. Guesses, a setting, where it happens, right? We can all get that far. I'm so proud of us. All narrative, of course, happens within a framework. So a setting isn't necessarily always just a place, just a being. Our setting isn't just this room. The setting isn't just Tatooine. It's the whole backdrop for where the narrative takes place. And Star Wars especially, when they said we're covering Star Wars, and I go, okay, which one and which part? And they said all of them.
Not in detail.
And this series goes on for how many weeks? And they said 2 hours. And I laughed, didn't I? And that's because these narratives have little mini narratives situated within, as you can already tell by Tom and Kay and Joe and Adrian, and as they've all talked, all the different elements so far with the way they look at it. But the setting is the backdrop. It's the context. It's how we understand overall what's going on. It places us. It gives us a frame to begin our understanding. It helps to provide that context, and therefore structure comes through the description of time and plot and place and social circumstances. When you look at a setting, you want to consider the positioning of the people with things within the environment and the surrounding. Now, one thing that I'm pretty sure Joe's going to talk about, which is very cool, is meaning can come from simply where you place somebody in the frame of the picture. And that's fine. I'm not going to steal his thunder because it's really cool. But that comes in itself as a very powerful place, where you are within the room, what you are doing within the room. All of that is then part of setting. The locale, the time of day, the scenery, the props, the time period in general. All of that is really important in setting your setting. The characters, probably one of the biggest things to talk about. Don't let me intrude, because Kay knows all about character progression, as she's already shared about Anakin. But characters, what's interesting is characters aren't just people. Characters can be overarching personalities, and how those personalities evolve or devolve, as we talked about the parallels happening between Anakin and Luke, brought up by everybody in different ways, which was cool. Let me know on time. Yeah, just roll the dice.
This is not a watch.
I'm like, let me know on time. What's she gonna do? Roll a 20
I just
sider.
rolled an 8.
You
You're
are done. But anyway, your characters can also be legends, myths, ideas, principles, groups, organizations. All of those really can constitute characters. When you're analyzing the individual characters of a rhetorical artifact, well, that's just a fancy way to say the cool thing we're looking at. Be careful to deconstruct the features and traits that form the nature of that person or the thing. So it isn't enough just to say Kathleen, the over-exaggerating, overbearing, loudmouth rhetorician up front. We want to look at why is she that way? What are her motives? What are her values? What are her morals and ethics? And yes, those are all different. By the way, I have a degree in philosophy too, so just saying. But you need to consider. Oh, okay. You need to consider personality traits, those that stand out and those that go against the grain of what is established. If you have an overly kind of a pacifist, a really peaceful, mellow person that gets really loud at a certain point, that's something that you need to pay attention to. Roles, status, potential, reputations. How do the characters affect each other? How do they influence their environment? And so you're going to see over and over that these all interact. We don't get to draw perfect little boxes. We have the environment, and then we have the characters, and then we have how the characters interact in the environment and the setting. We also have the action, which is very difficult to distinguish from the characters. But it is different in that the action is the events happening throughout the narrative. Like when Tom was saying, okay, we had chapter 1 of the Hero's Quest, chapter 2, we had this, I love his handout with the sets, of in a standard mythological basis, we go through these developments. Those are really important, and especially if you have a set genre, if you have a set expectation, and then all of a sudden we veer off of it, that's again something really important that must be looked at. You want to observe conduct and behavior and deeds, especially when the characters are trying to deal with the events in the script or accomplish their own goals. Are these characters acting consciously? Are they acting on instinct? Where are the loci of controls? So does the character have control over their actions themselves, their environment? How much power do they have? Versus is everything being acted upon them? And how do they react to that? Is part of that quest to bring more control into their lives and act out on their environment? Fun stuff to think about. But when we address action, we are analyzing how. How is the character doing this? How is the character being influenced or influencing? When we're looking at character, we're looking at the person and describing them and how they and as they move throughout and change and evolve or devolve. When we're looking at action, we're looking at how they're doing it. And that's one of the ways to help distinguish those areas a little bit. And especially, how is that character functioning? So the saga, again, different from action, the saga is the overall event. It's the ongoing story. So within a narrative, within a story, we have lots of different actions, lots of different things happening, but what is the overall move? What is the overall arc? What is point A, B, and C? We get the plans, we do this, we prepare, we send the ship down, and after Rogue One, we know why. It worked. It wasn't happenstance. So the saga is the actual story as we move throughout. It's what brings all the characters and the actions and the settings. The saga is what brings all of that into a really cohesive shell so that we understand what the characters are doing and why there is that action and why we have that backdrop and those framing of everything. And finally, let's see, do I have anything else cool? Yes, cohesive narrative. I said that. And then finally, the master analog, which is basically, it's the message. The more you know, the G.I. Joe, all that good stuff. But really, it's the overarching message. And there can be several within it. But the overarching message, often it comes down to, is this a righteous global cause? Is it an overall story for the good of all humanity? Is it utilitarian? Is it a practical type story? Is it social? Is there a social awareness, a social consciousness underpinning? Some kind of combination of all of those is the most likely. but it clues us in to when we look at the master analog, when we look at the overarching messages, the overarching ideas, the parable at the end, the the sour grapes thing, whatever. That helps move us into the motivation of the characters and why we move and why other things are there. So they're all connected, but when we can analyze and really break them apart, then it's a lot easier to understand in depth.
I want to quickly springboard from some things that Kathleen talked about, symbols of shared language and music. I know Joe had a lot to say about how those were used.
Yeah, sort of. A little bit. So just real quick, show of hands. Han shot first.
What was the question?
Sean
Did Han
Han
shoot
shot
first?
first.
Who's on that team? Han shot first.
It's not even a question,
I don't know. There's only 4 hands. Han shot first. Han shot second. Who's Han? So Lucas used a lot of cinema theory and stuff when he shot the Star Wars movies. The use of the various shots, I'll go over here in a second. The use of colors and different things. At the start of A New Hope, everybody knows, or does everybody know what color Luke was wearing at the start? What was his outfit when we first see him on Tatooine?
Isn't it white?
Yeah, he's wearing whites. Lucas was a big fan of those sort of 50s and 60s serials. You would go to the theater and you would watch, each week a new episode that was on a cliffhanger. So those sort of cowboy ideas of the good guy wears white, the bad guy wears black. He brought a lot of that into that. So at the beginning, he's wearing whites. Move up to Empire Strikes Back. He goes to Bespin and Dagobah, and he's got this kind of a gray. He's showing some age, some maturity, some stuff has gone down, and he's growing as a character. And then when you see him in Return of the Jedi, he shows up in black, and the first time you see that, you're going like, what, did he went to the dark side? Mm-hmm. What's going on here? I don't know what's going on. So it's, he's a very, very different character. He didn't go to the dark side, but you could kind of see there's a risk of him doing that. So the colors of the costumes, like the Jedi, they wear these brown and tan robes. The Jedi are supposed to be these peaceful, kind of nature, everybody get along kind of folks, and their clothing kind of reflects that. So from the cinematography aspects, let me find my notes here. I want to talk about 7 design principles that kind of help convey a feeling and mood. A New Hope, obviously it was a 2D film, but within the 2D frame, what you want to do is you want to give depth. So imagine that shot, R2 and C-3PO have crash landed on Tatooine. They're walking through the desert, and their ship is way in the background, and then there's this sand dune way beyond that and the sand before them. So it gives us a real sense of depth. So Lucas uses a lot of, in the cinematography, placing things throughout, not side to side, but forward and back to show depth and scale. Contrasts. When you've got these powerful characters like Jabba the Hutt, you put them up here on a dais, and then the little people are down here, they're, they're just the peons. But then the powerful people, they're sitting up here. So you see that with Jabba the Hutt, you see that with the Emperor. You climb these steps to his throne.
Call them all people.
I think so.
Well, I was a peon down there, but now I'm Jabba. And I'm reducing my carbs to not be Jabba. So, but anyway, so there's a lot of contrast. When everybody is down on that little skiff above the Sarlacc pit, and Jabba's sail barge is massive in the background, they feel small, they feel weak, and it makes makes those big characters like Snoke and that giant hologram feel powerful.
Right.
For all we know, Snoke might be this old doddering dude, you know, in a wheelchair, just scarred up face, be like, you go do evil. But the way he's presented in comparison to, we know Ren, his power, I mean, he stopped a blaster bolt. Nobody's done that. That's crazy. And then Snoke towers above him, creates this like, oh, that must be like the biggest dude. Because of that contrast in the frame and how they're presented. Negative space. After C-3PO and R2 have their little lover spats and they go their separate ways, it's like, I'm going to go where it's sandy, I'm going to go where it's rocky. You see C-3PO just kind of sitting there in the middle of this desert. Just this massive landscape, and he's just like small, trudging along. So it gives a sort of sense of scale. Lucas also used those shots to sort of provide a little breathing room between the various actions. Perspective. When the Emperor gets thrown down the shaft, you're looking down that shaft. A lot of the shots, I mean, they're just kind of cool, you know, overlooking places that you just don't see in your everyday life. I mean, all of Star Wars is someplace that you don't see in your everyday life, unless you're from Saudi Arabia, and then you might see some sand in Morocco. Another thing that he used quite successfully is symmetry, where Tom was talking about, you know, that's the scene where they're getting the medals. You know, the camera is like centered up, there's a center aisle, they're walking down between all the people on either side. It really focuses the viewer's eye in on those heroes, and it adds a lot of power to the scene. Something else you can use for, you know, cinematography-wise that Lucas does very well is directionality. Empire Strikes Back, Luke and Vader have had a little spat. Vader disappears and Luke's trying to find him. You remember the big round tunnel he goes through? Luke's all the way at the end, and all these lines in the tunnel, they draw your eye right to Luke. So using things like directional leading lines in your cinematography, Lucas does that very well to send your eye right where he wants it to go. Another thing he uses very well is repetition, especially when it comes to the Empire. When you have repetition of the same things visually, it lends them power and strength. So you see these massive formations of stormtroopers, and there's this facelessness with the stormtroopers, but there's so many of them, they're like ants. Like, you know, like the documentary movies you see, the army ants in the Amazon, you just know they're just going to devour you and it's going to suck and there's nothing you can do about it. And so that repetition of these images lends strength and power, and in this case the power is the Empire, and it makes their threat, their dangers to the rebel cause that much greater emotionally. What was your question again?
Kathleen was talking about how there are recognizable symbols, like we had talked about with the appearance of the Nazi symbology and things that were used to
like
identify bad guys.
with the costuming, whether you know this or not, Darth Vader's helmet. If you look at the back of Darth Vader's helmets, it's modeled after a German military helmet, the shape, the flare, and you see their uniforms and everything. There's strong Nazi influences with the Empire, and you see them and you instantly go, those are bad guys. You know, you don't have to be told they're bad guys. You don't have to hear them say anything or watch them do anything. You just look at them and you go, I think that's a bad guy. And you look at the rebels, you know, they're a little more chill and relaxed, like the hallway in A New Hope right at the beginning. They're wearing the goofy helmets, and I think they're wearing like vests, and you know, it's like Casual Friday, 1978. You know, it's like I'm gonna shoot those guys when they come through. You know, stormtroopers can hit stuff. My theory is they were told not to shoot Luke and Leia, but but you see those sorts of images. Everything with the Empire, it's grays and blacks and whites. This is very grayscale, where the rebels, they have a bright orange jumpsuit, and it's like, hey, we're the good guys. You know, you don't have to fear us. We're safety orange. So you definitely see that difference in the good and the bad very easily, just by the things that they're wearing, the things that they're doing. You know, even their symbols, the rebel symbol, it's got, you know, nice flowy curves and everything, and then the Empire symbol is just like straight lines and angles. You know, it's just very rigid and regimented and mathematical, where this is a little more flowing and it's kind of a weird anchor sort of, I don't know what. But you definitely get a feel for how different they are just by looking at them.
And, Joe talked about, you know, the stormtroopers and these masks. They are very anonymous, and if you look really at the entire universe, there are a lot of faceless or facially scarred villains. And Darth Vader has the mask. Well, the stormtroopers, you don't see them. The Emperor, when he finally does become, you know, the Emperor, he's horribly, horribly scarred and twisted. Snoke's the same way. And then you have Kylo, who wears the mask he doesn't need, obviously trying to conjure up that connection to Darth Vader. But then there's this, you know, beautiful young boy face underneath, almost to say he's not quite there yet. And just like we talked about with Yoda telling Luke, you have to face your father, Kylo's told the same thing in different words, because we don't know yet that we don't know the whole relationship yet. But you know, he's told you have to go face your past, and that ends up being making that decision: is he going to kill his father, or isn't he? So I can only imagine that at some point in the near future, something bad has to happen to his face, because he
does take one right at the end.
That's true. And so, you know, what's he going to look like in the next movie? Because for him to truly follow in the path of all of these evil people, he can't be this pretty young boy anymore. That's not going to work.
I saw a still or something the other day. They like moved the scar and made it much less like gnarly looking. So he won't be as good.
Yeah, not as.
Not yet.
But not
Not
yet.
yet.
Which means possibly that he has a chance at redemption still.
One other thing I wanted to talk about with the ring composition and stuff. Who can tell me which would-be Jedi watched their mentor die at the hands of a Sith Lord? Obi-Wan. And Luke Skywalker. So there's this interesting parallel between Obi-Wan and Luke Skywalker, where they were both cut off from their mentor. They both watched their mentor die at the hands of a Sith Lord. They both defeated the person who killed their mentor in the end. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how the next 3 movies come about. Is Luke going that Obi-Wan route in his story arc?
Would you say that Rey falls into that category in The Force Awakens, with Han functioning as her mentor?
He definitely is that mentor-father figure, and he's cut off from her. She watches helplessly as he's cut down by not a Sith Lord, but the embodiment of the dark side. Mm-hmm. Excellent point. So that cycle keeps coming back. I think it's totally going to happen. Theory time.
Or will she watch Luke as a
Right.
new mentor?
Mm-hmm.
But and I had also thought about Finn.
Mm-hmm.
He's, they're not on that same path, the Jedi path, but definitely Han is, a mentor to him, and he watches that also. Anything else you would like to add about character before we open up for questions? I kind of cut you off quickly.
Well, your mention of Kylo Ren kind of got me thinking about, again, those parallels. And what I find very interesting about Ren as a villain is he's still like a villain in training. And it's mentioned pretty clearly. Pardon?
He's Dr. Horrible.
I
I wanted that so bad.
And what I think is very interesting about him is that struggle. and that conflict where we literally see him alone and in a moment, a private moment where he's not having to perform for anybody. So I feel like it's an honest moment where he's sitting there like praying to Darth Vader for the strength to keep being evil. And I'm really intrigued by that arc and where we're going with that, and that kind of threshold moment that you mentioned where he had to make that decision. Is he going to stay the course and cross that threshold and do what his Dark Master has told him to do, or is he going to accept help? And if he had done that, we would have just been the end of the movie would have just been the world's most awkward ride home on the Millennium Falcon. And I think about that a lot. But I'm really interested in like what you said about that symbolism with the scar, and where we're going to go with that and how that's going to affect him. And does that mean that there's room for redemption? Is he still in for the Skywalker special? Who's going to lose a hand in this trilogy?
It's
I
coming.
don't know. I feel like we
Somebody's
have
got to.
Yeah.
I feel like we have a lot of room to work with him as a villain.
I think we should Tycho Brahe the nose. Nobody knows who Tycho Brahe is.
I heard the name.
Like for me personally, the thing that I always found the least interesting about the Star Wars saga was the black and white morality. Like we've got the good guys over here and we've got the bad guys over here, and there's absolutely nothing in between. Like you're one or the other, and a single act is going to take you from one side to the other or back again. And what I think we're kind of slowly moving away from, starting with episode 7, is we're kind of getting into those messy in-between spaces, which are interesting for me as a viewer and as a storyteller, and the opportunities that it gives us with character. Like we have someone like Finn who has that kind of interesting past, and seeing how that will affect him. Or we have someone like Kylo Ren where you kind of get the sense that there's more to it and there's more conflict there, and maybe it's not as simple a situation as you might think it is on the first pass. But that's what I'm really looking forward to with the rest of this trilogy.
Rogue One, I think is really good for that.
Oh, yeah.
Because you see this perspective of the rebels, because everything before is like, they're totally good guys.
Mm-hmm.
They're never going to screw anybody over. Oh, wait, except the beginning of the Rogue One, he kills his friend because his friend, is wounded and he can't climb out.
Mm-hmm.
And, they talk about all the horrible things they've done for the cause. So they're not that perfect white knights that during the Skywalker saga of, the 7 movies so far, they've been portrayed to be. So.
Yeah. Which I think is interesting sociologically, because I don't think our society accepts ultimate good, ultimate evil like we used to.
Things have changed a lot in the last 50 years.
Even the last 30 or 40 years. So yeah, I think in that way it will have to mature a little. Like, going back to Star Trek for a moment, Roddenberry's world was very idealistic, and these guys are completely good, but you look at the newer movies and that it's not quite as true anymore.
Because it's an alternate reality.
It's an alternate reality, right? Which makes it, everything he does is totally fine because it's an alternate reality. But it is less shiny and pretty.
But yeah,
I don't
you're
think
right.
modern audiences really accept that. Okay, anybody have questions so far about anything, or about what we've talked about, or anything we haven't talked about?
I have a couple questions that I was just wondering. First one would be, why is Finn, why doesn't he look like the bounty hunter when he is supposed to be a copy of the bounty hunter?
Oh, Joe?
You're talking about Jango Fett?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the kind of evolution of the Stormtroopers are Jango Fett went in and he was cloned to make all the clone troopers. After the first 3 movies, basically that program ended, and so over the next 10, 15 years, they moved away from the clones into the Stormtroopers, who were actually people that were recruited to become the Stormtroopers.
Mm-hmm.
So eventually all the clones just died out. They just got old and eventually died. So
Blown up.
Yeah.
Yeah,
a lot of that.
Mostly blown up.
yeah, a lot of them got blown up. by the time of A New Hope, I'm not sure how many clone troopers were still left.
Like in Rebels, there's like 3.
At
There's-
least 3.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's very few of them. So by the time you get back to the New Order, the new version of the Empire, and I don't know if it's clear. I haven't read the books, but it sounds like they're kind of like maybe taking kids at a very early
Yeah.
age and indoctrinating them, kind of like Ender's Game and Kurt Russell movie Soldier, where they would take them as kids and just train them to be these killing machines.
Like Spartans.
Yeah, I think what was it Hux mentioned, but my men are exceptionally trained from birth.
Yeah.
Blah, 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 blah. So,
Okay.
So you had mentioned the original series being rather black and white, and considering what we saw in Rogue One, the kind of forcing people to build the Death Star, what is your take on the destruction of the Death Star that was being built, such as all the workers that were conscripted to build it? How does that affect your viewing of the Rebels?
I love you for asking that question.
It's a good question.
Do I love to yell at people about this very subject?
It's like a meme, like in person.
It is, but I think that's something that's so interesting to examine, and we don't get into that in the movies. And from what I've seen of, like, say, Star Wars Rebels, we are kind of touching into that, where at what point does the rebellion acknowledge that not necessarily everyone who is working for the Empire is doing so willingly? Like, I'm sure there were technicians and janitors on the Death Star. I'm sure there were all kinds of people who... I think one of the recent novels confirmed that like 90% of the people working on the Death Star had no idea what it was. They thought it was a battle station, but they didn't realize it was actually called the Death Star, which would have been a big tip if that had been the main name for it. And I just think it's such an interesting moral question about, every time they blow up a Star Destroyer, that's 20 or 30,000 people that have just been killed, and we don't acknowledge the weight of that those are human lives, or, were there non-humans in the Empire? Were there a lot of aliens mixed in there, or was it probably
No, it was
mostly
mostly
human
human,
lives?
yes.
I don't know, I think, and like we touched on with Rogue One, that first establishing moment for Cassian, where we see that we do have people who are willing to do bad things, or to do the dirty work and the morally messy work in the service of a greater cause. And I guess the question you have to ask yourself is, like, at what point does it become morally wrong, or how far does the service of the greater cause carry you as you're getting into these messier and messier and darker acts?
Well, it seems like Saul might be a really interesting character to examine from that perspective too, because he's a guerrilla leader, right? I mean, that's the function that he fulfills. That's the archetype that he seems to be living into, and his kind of, I don't know, he doesn't want to be saved at the end, and that's a really interesting narrative point, in that, like, he's been at this for a good long time, and he's probably had to deal with the weight of having killed a lot of people for, like, some pretty sketchy moral reasons to advance that greater cause, and that he's like, you know what, I'm just gonna go ahead and die here, is really interesting, because it's not that difficult to get him out of there. I mean, they do the thing visually where they fly out of the disaster, or the explosion, and they could have gotten Saul out of there. So that, I don't know, that'd be really interesting kind of to figure out Saul a little bit. I don't know if there's much development in the non-movie material about characters like that.
Yeah, I think you have to go back to the Star Wars Rebels cartoon to learn more about him.
Yeah.
When I was 5 years old, black, white, good guys, bad guys, no doubt, no question. As I got older, I have started to see the world as much grayer than I did when I was younger. Because, you know, that very thing is, there's a lot of people that, you know, didn't necessarily deserve to die on the Death Star. Remember at the beginning of A New Hope, what's Luke complaining he wants to do? He wants to transmit his application to the Academy. Well, what Academy is he talking about? Is it the Imperial Academy? Which I think it is. It is not that he's a bad guy, but he just, you know, wants to do what it takes to get out of there. It's like, you know, that 18-year-old wants to get out from under his parents so badly. I'm going to join the military. Not because I want to go off and kill people. It's just my out. It's Luke's way off the planet. And I'm sure there's a ton of people in the Empire. I mean, it's their governments. It's just normal for them. So it's not that they're bad people necessarily. They're just doing their thing for their government. So,
Well, and yeah, that is an interesting perspective to take. I mean, these are rebels. These are guerrilla fighters, you know, like we would see in a jungle somewhere in a third world country. They're fighting against the lawful government.
and his friend Biggs actually was in the Imperial Academy when he defected over to the Rebels. So, you know, a lot of the Rebels started out at the Imperial Academy, became disillusioned, and went, you know, there's got to be a better way.
Is there a question?
One question, another one. So when Luke first gets his father's lightsaber, it was white. When he's practicing with it, it was white. After that, never white again. Changing colors multiple times. Is Luke's granddaughter, I'm thinking, or whatever, whoever, what's her name?
Right.
Is she the granddaughter, right?
We don't know yet.
I like how we all knew who he was talking about.
Nobody knows
She's
yet,
a
but
Skywalker. I don't make the rules, but that's how it is.
Kenobi.
Well, point is like, at the very end, of course, she had a green lightsaber.
Well, it's actually a problem with the technology that Lucas had available at, you know, the time in 1977 and 78 when he was making the films. When the lightsabers were first made, it was a handle with this like stick that had reflecty stuff on it, and it spun. It literally just spun, and they shined light on it, and it caught the light, and they had a horrible time making a cool lightsaber. So a lot of those shots like you're talking about, if you're watching the originals, you know, the VHS way back in the days, the color on the lightsaber is horrible, so it does look white. And you know, you look at Obi-Wan's when he's dueling with Darth Vader, the colors are terrible. And at one point, you know, it's kind of pointing towards the camera, it almost disappears. So really, it was just a technology issue. They did not have the CGI available to make the cool lightsabers that they had in episodes 1, 2, and 3. Did that answer your question?
Yes, it did. Yes, it did. And then on the, real quick before we head out, so you watched the original like when it came out, right?
Yes.
When it came out, right? So what do y'all remember? Do y'all remember
That's a great
Luke?
question.
I am your father, or do you remember no? I am your father.
It's no, I am your father is the
It's
line.
no?
It's misquoted because he said you killed my
Right.
father, and he says no, I am your father. But it's misquoted
Yeah.
so much that
That's right.
everybody recognized that Luke, I am your father.
I remember it as Luke. That's, I remember it.
Well, that gets to Kathleen's point of the power of the cultural connotation.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that, you know, get misremembered that way.
Yeah, we've heard it wrong so many times we think it's
So,
the right one.
And there's some crazy theories
That's how
that
people
I've
get elected.
heard of recently to explain that, but I don't even want to go into alternate dimensions in the real world right now.
All right, well,
All right.
Thanks.
Well,
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.
So I have a quick question on the episode 2 kind of goes over it with Clone Wars, but it's kind of glossed over a little bit. So the Galactic Federation's agenda seems to be the envelopment of new planets into the Federation. But this seems to come about through a very imperialistic agenda. This agenda doesn't seem to really be changed too much when the Galactic Empire takes power, except that, I mean, you still have the Senate at the start anyway.
Mhm.
And so there's not a whole lot of change other than the hunting of the Jedi in Order 66. How does that change? What's your viewpoint on why that is? Why there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of differentiation in between the two governmental systems, except instead of a chancellor, you have an emperor.
So if I understand your question, why is the Galactic Senate so similar to the Empire?
Exactly.
I could take that unless you guys want to jump in. I don't want to answer everything. I don't want to hog out the answers.
My answer would go into sociology and religion, so go for it.
But I think that's it, though, right? Is
Yeah.
that, I mean, most governments don't just decide one day they're going to become imperial, right? Like, I mean, sometimes, like,
And if so,
Erdogan
then
in
the
Turkey.
rebellion is immediate.
Yeah,
I mean, if
yeah.
you come in and say, sorry, I was going to let it go.
No, absolutely.
Jump in.
If you come in and you take, that's one of the reasons that Genghis Khan and the Roman Empire were so vastly successful, is they didn't come in and say, okay, you're all doing it my way now. Then when that happens, there's immediate and violent rebellion. They kind of went in and they said, okay, you belong to me. You can do things your own way. You're going to pay me taxes. And people are like, we can still do our own stuff, our own religions and all that. Yeah, just pay me money. And they're like, okay. And then slowly over time, it filters in. And, you know, it's like Easter and I don't want to get too much into that, but it's like Christmas and Easter and pagan holidays. It's a lot easier to say, okay, we're going to celebrate this now. We're calling it this, but we're going to do it at the same time that you used to celebrate that.
Yeah.
And slowly through the generations, we no longer celebrate A, we now celebrate B. And it isn't because we came in and said, ha, this is what you believe. We came in and we said, you do your thing. We're just going to hold our own celebration at the exact same time doing this. And so if you come into a place and you set up governments and you're like, no, look, no, really, honest, that there isn't much different. You've got a Senate with a leader of the Senate. We have this group of advisors. We're calling him emperor. It's really the same. And then next week we make a little change. It's the frog boiling thing. You stick a frog in boiling water and it's going to jump out. You stick the frog in the cold water and you slowly increase the temperature and the frog will sit there and boil to death.
Well, the Chancellor seizes power in episode 3, right? And doesn't dissolve the Senate until halfway through episode 4. And there's a 15, 20 year gap there. So it's been this like long erosion of powers. And I would imagine that there doesn't seem to have been much response from anyone. Like, oh, we're going to dissolve the Senate. And everyone's like, oh, there's still a Senate, like whatever. You know.
Yeah.
Well, your neighbor Bob, he was the Galactic Senate tax collector, and now he's your neighbor Bob, the Imperial tax collector. You know,
It's
you went
still
down to the
Bob.
Galactic's, the Galactic land speeder licensing office to take your land speeder tests, and there was a sign that said Galactic whatever one day, and then 2 weeks later there's a sign that says Empire, but it's the same people, it's the same everything. So people are just kind of like,
Well, and we're also talking about a vast universe. I mean, this is an emperor that, oversees how many
10,000
planets.
or something.
And so the average moisture farmer on Tatooine doesn't have a clue what's going on in the Senate, galactic, imperial, otherwise. Yeah.
Just trying to farm my moisture, man.
Right.
Just want to suck water out of the air.
Yeah.
So I don't mean to dominate questions, but this kind of leads me into my next question, which kind of goes back to the idea of black and white. Considering this mentality, that it is a gradual progression, and how does that make it justifiable to kill the average Imperial when it's been a slow indoctrination over time?
And I think that touches on, the heart of warfare. I mean, yes, you may have the leaders who are wholly evil and bent on destroying entire peoples and ways of lives and controlling every aspect of things. But their soldiers, are 18 to 25-year-old guys from 87 different planets who have different religions and different backgrounds and different belief systems. But there they are in uniform and they're fighting. And I think it's the same in any war. You're going to have innocent people who are dying, and it might be that they're dying to protect the way they were raised, their religion, whatever. It might just be that they're fighting. I mean, let's go back, medieval and Game of Thrones. Those people out there fighting for their lord, they just want to farm their moisture. They just want to grow the food that's going to get them through the winter. And someone says, here's a weapon, go kill that guy, because I'm your lord and I say so. And so, yeah, when you get into that whole area of warfare, I think it's unavoidable that you're going to have those innocent people. And I think Finn is a great way of bringing home that point in the Star Wars universe where things were painted as black and white. But then you have 100 Finns on that battlefield wearing stormtrooper masks. So yeah, it really humanizes them, I think.
Yeah, I think you can almost tie it in visually to like what you were talking about the design of the stormtroopers and like this faceless mass, where maybe not from a moral perspective, but as a viewer, if I'm watching these faceless stormtroopers, getting blown up, I can't even see them. They don't look like people to me. They look like they're wearing like insect shells. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't have that kind of impact where when I see, the rebels who are dressed more warmly, more casually, who look like people, it has more of a visceral impact. And I guess that's just from like a storytelling perspective.
When I was 6, I assumed they were robots.
Yeah.
When you're 5 or 6 years old, you see it for the first time, they're robots.
Yeah,
C-3POs are robots, stormtroopers are robots, and only later do you find out it's like, oh no, that's
yeah,
actually, those
you
are
really
people.
have no way of knowing at that time that there's like a human person in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as cinema, she's absolutely right. They're dehumanized, and it makes the viewer more comfortable with the mass murder. Like the 10,000 orcs. Sitting outside of Helm's Deep, it's like, they're just orcs.
Yeah, but they're created out of mud and they're evil
they're
from the
engineered.
beginning, so they don't count.
Yeah.
We don't feel bad about the clones.
But again, that makes
Some of
it
us
easy
feel
for the
bad
viewer
about
to
the
accept
If
killing
you
them.
watched the Clone Wars cartoon, you would
The
feel
clones are
bad.
slaves.
We've got
okay?
another question.
It's more of an observation than a question. The Force Awakens was the first time, besides Finn, that you see the stormtroopers act human.
Yeah.
Ren's throwing a temper tantrum.
I was gonna.
Stormtroopers
Yeah.
walk around the corner, they turn around and walk the other way.
That's one of my favorite points in the whole.
That was hilarious.
whole movie.
That is,
Great.
yeah.
Right,
Great.
and snarky when Rey's telling him to buzz off.
Right. Of course, they do get blown up a couple hours later.
They do, but it gets away from the black and white more. It's
Yeah.
these are
Yeah.
people, they have feelings, they have thoughts, they have common sense, although they don't follow it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the film goer is much more mature than we were back in 1978. I don't know if it's my age versus when I was 5, but I think we watch films differently than we used to. Star Wars was not the best picture that year. Can anybody name it? It's a horrible movie. I can't remember the name of it, but somebody liked it. Today, it just wouldn't fly. Star Wars, still watch it, still awesome.
So that kind of leads into a question I had. I know the answer myself, but I want to hear it. So the original trilogy, people like myself who were kids when that came out, we have memories of, we love those movies. The prequels that came out, we were pretty disappointed with. I think most people that grew up on the original trilogy, but people who grew up on the prequels, younger people, turns out they actually liked them. What do you guys think about that?
Well, I would say in our household it's very interesting because the two of us saw A New Hope in the theater, grew up with those. Our son, who's in the front row here, he grew up on the trilogies, or on the original, episodes 1, 2, and 3. And yeah, I mean, he loved Anakin Skywalker, was Anakin for Halloween one year. And, you know, we've had arguments about midichlorians, whether they should just be ignored forever and never discussed, and we just block out mentally that they were even in the first movie, or whether they're a really important, cool thing. And so, yeah, I think the perspective is very different. Kay, you were definitely, you know, not watching it in 77. Yeah.
I mean that is such a good point, that how much of it, how you look back on these things is nostalgia because it was something from your youth, and how much of it is. I mean, when I was a kid, when I watched The Phantom Menace for the first time, I thought Jar Jar was like this fun, goofy alien. Like, I loved Jar Jar. I had a great time. I was 9. Like, what do you want from me?
Yeah.
And even through the rest of it, like, looking back, I like Attack of the Clones, okay? I think it's a fun movie, and I don't care who knows it. But I think it's very interesting to look at it from that perspective, because I know objectively, like, they're not great, and I'm of the opinion that we should just reboot them. Like, we can do it over, and we can do it right this time. But when I look back on them, I have these feelings of fondness, because I remember being a kid and being excited about Star Wars because I had been watching and rewatching those VHS tapes, and there was a new one coming out. What are you talking about? And that momentum kept going until I was like 12 or 13, and that was what I had. So I don't know. I look back on it as like a nice part of my youth when I'm not trying to be logical about it.
Right. Well, bringing up Jar Jar, something else that I was wanting to talk about tonight, the comic relief that, you know, is necessary in an action-packed movie. To me, Jar Jar was comic relief gone completely awry. Whereas in the original trilogy, we had the droids who were funny. We had Chewbacca, who provided some funny moments. Even Princess Leia, who did not have a great sense of humor in episode 4. So, you know, I'd rather kiss a Wookiee line. That was hilarious. So did anyone else kind of think that, you know, he took this idea of comic relief that worked in the first 3 and then just went crazy with it?
Like, setting Jar Jar just completely aside, in the same way that we can set the Ewoks completely aside. Just the droids. C-3PO is excellent comic relief in 4, 5, and 6 because he's understated, right? He's not trying too hard, right? In 1, 2, and 3, there's those idiotic scenes where, I mean, he's trying to drop one-liners, like, "Oh, this is such a drag."
I'm
as he's
beside
being
myself.
I'm beside myself, or you know, robots making robots. It's such a nightmare. Like, no, what?
Who else is going to make a robot when
Yeah.
you've got robots?
So I think, you know, and I don't know how to account for that other than bad writing. You know, what worked, they tried to exaggerate. What worked in like, you've got these lovable characters, well, let's make them more lovable by distorting all of the features that we supposedly loved about them, and we get all of that stuff.
I think Lucas created a great frame for his stories, but I think his personal
Setting.
Yes.
I think his writing is really what fell down in episode 1, 2, and 3. But with Jar Jar, he did what he wanted to do. He wanted to entertain the kids, and at 9 years old,
That is true. That's a good point.
he hit his mark.
Oh, yeah.
Kids
And
love Jar Jar. What can I
maybe Jar
say?
Jar is this crazy drunken Sith Lord master. I don't know. Have you guys heard that theory?
Yeah.
That he's actually a Sith Lord? Because if you look at it, it's just like everything he does leads to the dark side and the end of the Galactic Empire.
Mark has a question.
I just had a quick little stat, not a stat, just something I found out today. Jar Jar Binks in episode 1 has more screen time than Darth Vader in episode 4.
Oh,
Yeah, I believe it.
It's only like a couple minutes more, but it's
More fun.
Darth Vader really had very little
like
screen
10
time.
minutes in episode 4.
yeah.
He had such, an impact in such a brief period of time. Can I turn left here real fast?
Sure.
The first thing you see on screen a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. There's a theory which I ascribe to that the Star Wars saga is being told by R2-D2 sometime in the future, well beyond the time we're seeing in the movies, and that they're told from an unreliable narrator perspective, because R2 is kind of this hero. Everything he does is cool, everything he does is successful.
When everyone else is bumbling, he solves the problem.
His partner C-3PO is an idiot, but he fixes everything. Oh, the Millennium Falcon's broken. You guys are stupid. I'm just going to turn this and... and so I just want to throw that out there as an observation, as a possible theory, that a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away is R2-D2 recounting somewhere far away in the future the Star Wars saga.
And he's the only one who was there for all of it.
Discuss. And he was. He didn't get his memory wiped. C-3PO did. So.
Yeah.
I think that's one of those things that seems like when you're GMing and you're like, oh yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I've been that way all along. Because it works out really well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I could go with that. I could
Yeah.
be pretty happy. But to the idea that Lucas started with that as his kernel, impossible. He is not that clever.
Probably true. But it's an interesting idea.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I like it.
Well, it's kind of like that meme. It's like, what does it mean when the curtains are blue? Oh, it represents his mental state and the depression he's going through, and this change in his life. And what the author meant was the curtains were blue. So yeah, there's a lot we can look at there, whether it was intentional or not. Yeah, who knows? Something else that we had want to talk about was music, because is there anything we touched on the Imperial March? Is there anything more iconic than that sound?
Yeah, the Star Wars theme music is that heroic. What is it?
It's a major fifth. It starts out with a
major fifth. Do do. You hear that in hero music, and John
Williams.
Yeah.
He uses it.
Is just genius, and the idea of the leitmotif where you have that Imperial March, you hear the music, you see Darth Vader, you see a Star Destroyer, all that stuff, and these themes kind of go throughout. You hear the same or similar music for the different characters. There's a Princess Leia theme and Bespin and all these different things. So that the musical leitmotif, which is a sound of a song or specific song that goes with a specific character or situation, like Jaws, that doo-doo, that's the leitmotif for Jaws. You hear that sound, it's the shark. You hear the Imperial March, it's Darth Vader.
Well, even the Foley art, I mean, the sound of a TIE fighter, that's the only sound
Yeah.
that is that,
That screechy
right?
sound.
The sand people, the sound of a lightsaber. I mean, there's so many of those. I mean, to Kathleen's kind of culture building that comes out of this saga is, every aspect of it has kind of been carried forth in these new ways. I heard something the other day, and it was a TIE fighter. Like it was Foley art. It was a recorded sound that was played in like a commercial or something, and just like half a second of it is enough to evoke the whole thing, right? And so you get the full connotative power of the Empire and the warships of the Empire in just that half a second of sound. I mean, that's brilliant.
The distinct sound of the Millennium Falcon is two recordings of McDonnell Douglas jets, and the two combined make that roaring engine sound. Like you say, it's the only sound you hear. Like the pod racing, each pod had its own distinct sound, and each one was recorded differently. So the sound design is brilliant.
Yeah. Well, you got the Wookiees.
The first trailer for Force Awakens, when you see and hear the Millennium Falcon, I mean,
Yeah, totally.
I mean, who didn't turn into a gibbering child,
Right.
when that tarp flew off? It's like, it's the Millennium Falcon! We don't want that hunk of junk. Oh,
Right.
yes, we do. And then you see that hunk of junk, it's just like,
How dare you?
Yeah.
I'm 6.
Well, and extending it too with the Kylo Ren's lightsaber makes a different sound, and they can do all the lighting things that they want to do now, so you can get that jacked up kind of
Yeah.
effect on it, because they're just not as good at making lightsabers, because they're not real Jedi.
And you had found out online somewhere, the crystal's damaged, right?
Yeah, it's a cracked crystal, and the keyones are actually ports for the extra energy to just escape, and they happen to look awesome.
It's not just for
Some
the
people say
aesthetic,
that
but it's
also.
partly for the aesthetic.
Yeah, yeah.
Did he actually stop the blade?
Yes.
Okay. And
So
it's,
they're
They're
functional.
functional.
They're functional in multiple ways. Yeah.
if it was
Yeah.
functional, it would just be done.
And Finn, Kylo Ren did actually use it to hit Finn
Right.
in the
Mhm.
chest when they were holding it. He
Wow.
rotated the handle.
Yeah.
Does everybody know that kyber crystals from Rogue One, that's what lightsabers are made from?
And for the Death Star.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So those are the same crystals. That's why they were on that planet stealing the kyber crystals. That's where the young Jedi would go perform this little ritual and go into a cave, and their crystal would call to them, and they would find it, and then they would walk out, and if they, survived the ordeal, then they could go make their lightsaber and be a Jedi. Otherwise, they died.
Any other questions? We're getting a little tight on time. Anybody want to just wrap up with something we haven't discussed yet?
I mean, all this stuff, I think it's also worth saying these movies are just a damn lot of fun. I actually am a fan of episode 2. I think Attack of the Clones. I don't think Natalie Portman needs to get her shirt ripped open so that she's in a half shirt half the movie. But other than that, I thought it was actually a pretty solid movie. I can't enjoy, 1 is bad for so many reasons and 3 is bad for so many reasons. But aside from that, and really objectively, 4 is not a good movie. The dialogue is awful. Luke is a terrible actor. He's just a whiny kid. But all that objective stuff aside, they're just fun, right? And that's one of the things that Lucas was able to capture and continues to, in passing these off, is that these are fun movies. These aren't. Tolkien was trying to write literature, right? That was a battle of good and evil, for which the stakes were very high, right? And this is too, but in a much less Catholic way, so they can be fun at the same
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, see, I would agree on episode 2. I don't think there's even a plot.
Yeah, that's not true.
I like it, I think, best out of the first 3.
Yeah.
But I've gone back and I've watched them intentionally from a new perspective of, look deeper into what is there, and I've enjoyed them more the last couple times I've watched them than the first, 4 or 5 times I watched them.
See, they just make me madder every time. But so what do we think? Everybody, just briefly, what is it about that original movie that grabbed people so much and has held them for so long that it has become a cultural phenomenon where everybody knows that hooded figure there, everybody knows the Imperial March? What is it? Is it just that they were fun, or?
As a 5-year-old kid, I'm going to go with Tom. It was just awesome. I mean, you go, that was amazing, and it went kaboom, and then he was shooting off, and then he had a ceremony, and it's just as a kid, I mean.
I didn't do anything else as a child. I mean, we played Star Wars. That's what we did. We had, between my 3 friends, we had all the
Millennium
figures, we had all the
Falcon
ships.
and the AT-ATs and the speeders was my sisters, and I had the snow speeder, and I had a Darth Vader head full of action figures, and I would have to play Barbies in order to get my sister to play Star Wars with me, but it was a price I was willing to pay. A little Han Solo in the Hoth
I'd eat
outfits.
crappy cereal so that you could send away for the bounty hunters, the special edition bounty hunters. Because you had to have 55 proof of purchases.
The joy of childhood for
garbage
me.
cereals.
Just
Yeah. So, yeah.
I mean, in addition to them just being really, really fun, I mean, maybe some of it ties into like what you were talking about with the mono myth and like this collective consciousness kind of thing, where there's something about that story structure and something about just this adventure that we're going on that feels familiar and feels comfortable and is like hitting all the right points internally. And I don't know, maybe people just respond to it on like an instinctual level in addition to it just also happening to be a really cool movie that happened at the right time.
Well, I think that was the greatest crime of the prequels, is that they violated the monomyth, right? It's not a heroic quest. It's an anti-heroic quest. And that's not a familiar story.
That's true.
Right? It's not a story we know. It's not a story we can relate to. You know, I'm watching Luke and I'm thinking Arthur, right? Because I was raised on King Arthur, an Arthurian legend, and it's a very Arthurian story, right? But
You wanted to be Luke. You didn't want to be
yeah.
Anakin.
No, God.
My nephews ran around, Obi-Dobi-Dobi! You know, they wanted to be Obi-Wan Kenobi and couldn't say it. But nobody wanted to be Anakin.
At the end of my story, I want to get my legs cut off. I'm like, no, that's not
And burned by my best friends.
Yeah. Except that the kids who grew up with the prequels did want to be Anakin.
Or Obi-Wan,
Some did.
maybe.
Yeah.
He did.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, Kathleen, any thoughts about what made them such a phenomenon?
I'm not nearly as fun as these guys. I think that it resonated very clearly with where we were historically. I mean, we're talking about 1978. So this is still, even though it's a couple decades-ish off of World War II, we are still in that zone. We are just moving into the Cold War. You have to put it within the context. Cinematically, I mean, we were still watching spaghetti westerns and good and evil and the two at the ends. And so there were so many clear vibes. There were so many clear strains of things in America, in the United States culture that were representative in this. The bad people were dehumanized, kind of like what we were talking about with the scarring. And even Saul, every time he alludes to this fact, if not says it out loud, he says, I am not even me anymore. There's none of me left. And it's like
the Odyssey tale. If every part of the boat that comes back is replaced, is it still the same boat that comes back?
That's my good boy. and so that is, and you know, he's had his arm replaced, but there was an analogy left to every time part of him, every time he did an unspeakable act for the cause, he was no longer as human. And that was represented by a lost body part, a scar here, a scar there. Becoming uglier on the outside was representative of what was happening to the blackening on the inside as well. And so that his last act was his own last true act. It wasn't for the cause, it wasn't for anything else. It was taking his air off and just standing there. I'm done. I choose this. And he didn't even wait for the planet to kill him. It was his own, his one last act simply for himself. And so we come at a time where we've got World War II with the symbolic look of the Nazis. And, you know, that was a state institutionalized. And we came in and said, you're wrong. And especially in the United States, there was this righteousness of when we fight back, we are right. And so the rebels are right, fighting against this world order trying to seep into its insidiousness, and that resonated. And again, the story of the hero is told in a totally different way. Same story, different way, with lightsabers in space. Yeah. It's a Western in space. And so we have these themes that were very familiar, very comfortable, resonated with society, resonated where we were historically and where we wanted to be historically. And then on top of that, moving us forward, because there was also this push in the early 80s too of technology. So now we're also moving forward into space and into all these, you know, into all this new cool stuff. And not only that, but it starts out as a fairy tale in a place long, long ago. Once upon a time! Right?
Yeah.
So it's, I think it's all of those things. It's the historical context, it's a story that we're familiar with, it's the themes that we want to be and we want to live and we want to pass on to new and powerful generations, but told with excitement, told with in a new way, in where we want cinema to go and where we want storytelling to go. And so we see it over and over, and we buy the toys, and we do all the stuff, and we play all of that. And I think that that planted the seeds in our society to move us forward. And they're wicked fun movies.
All right, any final questions? Yeah, I think that's a good note to end things on.
One last bit of trivia.
Uh-huh.
Marvel Comics almost went out of business.
Oh,
If
this
not
is
for
interesting.
the Star Wars comic books that came out, Marvel might have gone under in 1978. They were doing that poorly. Star Wars comic books brought them back in the black. And we have the Marvel Cinematic Universe today, where if things had gone differently, we might not have
And since
had
I
any
didn't
more
have
Marvel.
Star Wars clothes, I thought I'd do this. Get it? Do you guys get it?
The
Yeah,
stars
your
on their
stars are
shoes.
fighting. I'm just wearing my gardening shoes.
Thank you guys for coming.
Thank you, everyone.